What happens when a late-night host pushes too far and a royal reaches his breaking point? Tonight, we dive into the explosive confrontation that left everyone speechless. Make sure to subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story will blow your mind. The Late Night with Seth Meyers studio buzzes with its usual energy as Prince Harry takes his place across from the host. The audience applauds warmly, expecting another charming royal interview filled with light-hearted banter about his new projects and life in California. Seth Meyers flashes his trademark grin, shuffling his note cards with practiced ease. Prince Harry, welcome back to Late Night, Seth begins, his voice carrying that familiar comedic cadence. Last time you were here, we talked about your memoir, your charitable work, all the good stuff, but tonight, I want to dig a little deeper. Harry nods politely, though something in Seth's tone makes him shift slightly in his chair. Of course. Happy to be here, Seth. Great, because I have to ask. Seth leans forward, his expression becoming more serious. There's been a lot of speculation about your relationship with your family back in England. Some people are saying you've been quite vocal about private family matters in very public forums. How do you respond to critics who say you're airing dirty laundry for profit? The question hangs in the air like a loaded weapon. Harry's smile falters for just a moment before he recovers, but viewers can see the tension creeping into his shoulders. Well, Seth, I think that's a rather simplistic way to look at it, Harry responds, his voice measured but with an edge. When you're trying to protect your family, sometimes you have to speak your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Seth doesn't let up. But isn't there something to be said for handling family disputes privately? I mean, your grandmother, the Queen, she never spoke publicly about family drama, right? Some might say there's wisdom in that approach. The mention of his grandmother causes Harry's jaw to tighten visibly. My grandmother was an extraordinary woman who faced very different circumstances than I do today. The media landscape, the pressures, the invasive nature of modern coverage, it's incomparable. Fair point, Seth concedes, but his tone suggests he's far from finished. But let's talk about the media coverage you've received versus the coverage you've sought out. You've done interviews, podcasts, a Netflix series, a book deal reportedly worth millions. At what point does seeking privacy become seeking publicity? The audience grows quieter, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Harry's media training kicks in as he maintains his composure, but his voice carries a new intensity. Seth, I think you're conflating two very different things here. Sharing my story, my experiences, that's not the same as courting tabloid attention or exploitation. There's a difference between controlled narrative and harassment. Seth presses on, seemingly oblivious to or perhaps deliberately ignoring the warning signs. But Harry, and forgive me for being direct here, some of your own family members have never spoken publicly about these issues you've raised. Your brother William, your father King Charles, they've maintained their silence even as you've made some pretty serious allegations. Don't you think their restraint speaks volumes? Harry's hands grip the armrests of his chair more tightly. Their restraint? Seth, you're assuming that silence equals dignity, or that staying quiet means taking the high road. Sometimes silence is complicity. The word complicity cuts through the studio like a knife. Seth raises his eyebrows, clearly surprised by the directness of Harry's response. Complicity in what, exactly? Seth asks, leaning back slightly. In a system that protects some at the expense of others, Harry responds without hesitation. In allowing harmful narratives to persist unchallenged, in prioritizing institution over individual well-being, Seth's expression shifts, and for the first time he seems to realize he may have pushed too hard. But instead of backing down, he doubles down. That's a pretty heavy accusation, Harry. You're essentially saying your own family, the royal family, is complicit in harm. That's not just personal family drama anymore. That's attacking an institution that millions of people respect and admire. Harry's eyes flash with something dangerous. I'm not attacking anything, Seth. I'm speaking truth to power, which is something I thought Americans valued. We do value truth, Seth replies quickly. But we also value context and proportionality. And honestly, from where many Americans are watching, it sometimes looks like you're using very serious issues, racism, mental health struggles, family, trauma, to justify what appears to be a very lucrative career move. The accusation hangs in the air like poison gas. Harry goes completely still, his breathing becoming more controlled, deliberate. The audience is dead silent now, sensing they're witnessing something unprecedented, a career move. Harry's voice is quiet, but there's steel underneath it. Seth, let me be very clear about something. My wife contemplated suicide because of the treatment she received. My children have to grow up knowing that half their heritage comes with a target on their backs. I left everything I knew, everyone I loved, to protect my family. You think that was a career move? Seth realizes he's crossed a line, but the damage is already done. Harry, I didn't mean to minimize your family's struggles. I just think there are legitimate questions about ... About what? Harry interrupts, his voice rising slightly. About whether my wife's mental health crisis was real enough, about whether the racism she faced was severe enough, about whether I had the right to choose my family's safety over an institution's reputation. The host tries to regain control. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that many people feel there might have been ways to address these issues without such public what? Harry's voice is sharp now, cutting through Seth's attempt at diplomacy. Such public honesty, such public accountability. You want to know what I think? I think people are uncomfortable with the truth because it challenges their comfortable narratives about institutions they want to believe are infallible. Seth shifts uncomfortably, clearly regretting the direction of the interview. Look, I respect your position, but surely you can understand why some people might feel that constant public criticism of your family seems what Harry demands, his patience clearly wearing thin, ungrateful, disloyal. Let me ask you something, Seth. If your employer was systematically damaging your wife's mental health, if they were allowing racist attacks against your family to go unchallenged, if they were prioritizing their public image over your family's well-being, what would you do? Seth tries to deflect with humor, a classic late-night host move. Well, I'd probably ask for better health insurance, he says, with a nervous laugh. But Harry doesn't laugh, the joke falls flat, and the silence that follows is deafening. The failed attempt at humor hangs in the air like a death knell. Harry stares at Seth with an expression that could freeze hell itself. The audience shifts uncomfortably in their seats, sensing they're witnessing something that shouldn't be happening. On late-night television? You think this is funny? Harry's voice is dangerously quiet. You think my family's trauma is material for your punchlines? Seth's face flushes red as he realizes his massive miscalculation. Harry, I apologize. It was inappropriate. I was just trying to lighten the mood. Lighten the mood. Harry's voice rises, and for the first time, his royal composure completely cracks. Seth, my wife, was suicidal. He begged for help and was denied. She was vilified in the press while pregnant with our son. And you want to lighten the mood? The host scrambles to recover, his media training kicking in. You're absolutely right. That was insensitive of me. But Harry, can we take a step back here? I understand you've been through difficult experiences, but surely there's a middle ground between suffering in silence and what some people see as a very public campaign against your own family. Harry's eyes narrow. A campaign? Seth, let me tell you about campaigns. There was a campaign against my wife from the moment our relationship became public. A coordinated effort to destroy her reputation, to paint her as difficult, demanding, divisive. Where was your concern about proportionality then? But Harry, Seth interjects, trying to regain control of his own show. You have to admit that some of the claims you've made are pretty explosive. The allegation about conversations regarding your son's skin color, the suggestion that your family was somehow complicit in the media treatment you received, these aren't small accusations. Harry leans forward, his intensity palpable. They're not accusations, Seth, they're facts. And the reason they seem explosive to you is because you're more comfortable with polite fiction than uncomfortable truth. Seth's producer can be seen just off camera, making frantic gestures, but Seth seems determined to continue down this destructive path. But don't you think there's something to be said for institutional loyalty? For supporting the monarchy that gave you privilege, platform, and purpose? The question is, like throwing gasoline on a fire, Harry's voice becomes ice cold. Institutional loyalty, Seth. That institution allowed my mother to be hunted by photographers until the day she died. That institution stood by while my wife was systematically destroyed in the media. That institution prioritized its own reputation over the safety and well-being of its own family members. And you want to lecture me about loyalty? The mention of Princess Diana sends a visible shock through the audience. Seth realizes he's wandered into extremely dangerous territory, but instead of retreating, he makes another fatal error. Harry, I understand the pain around your mother's death, but that was decades ago. Different leadership, different circumstances. Isn't it possible that you're projecting past trauma onto current situations? The studio goes dead silent. Harry's face transforms, and for a moment, he looks exactly like his mother. Fierce and uncompromising in the face of institutional betrayal. Projecting. Harry's voice is barely controlled fury. Seth, let me educate you about projection. Projection is when people who have never faced real consequences for their actions dismiss the experiences of those who have. Projection is when comfortable people minimize the suffering of others, because acknowledging it would require them to question systems they benefit from. Seth tries desperately to de-escalate. Harry, I think we're getting into territory that's maybe too heavy for late-night television, ... Too heavy, Harry interrupts, his voice rising again. Seth, this is exactly the problem. Everyone wants to benefit from the fairy tale, the pageantry, the glamour of monarchy, but nobody wants to deal with the human cost. You want the entertainment, value without the accountability. The host makes one last attempt to salvage the interview. Look, I respect your perspective, but surely you can understand why some people, even some Americans, might feel that your approach seems ... Seems what? Seth. Harry's patience is completely gone now. Ungrateful, entitled. Let me tell you what's entitled. What's entitled is thinking you can invite someone onto your show to discuss their trauma, and then judge them for how they've chosen to heal from it. What's entitled is thinking you can minimize someone's experiences because they don't fit your comfortable narrative. Seth's voice becomes defensive. I'm not minimizing anything. I'm asking legitimate questions that many Americans have. No. Seth. Harry cuts him off sharply. You're not asking questions. You're making judgments. You're perpetuating exactly the kind of thinking that made it impossible for my family to get help when we needed it. You're prioritizing institution over individual, image over truth, comfort over justice. The tension in the studio is unbearable. Now, crew members exchange worried glances, unsure whether to intervene. Seth makes one final, desperate attempt to regain control. Harry, I think you're being unfair here. I'm trying to have a balanced conversation about complex issues. Balanced. Harry's laugh is bitter and sharp. Seth, there's nothing balanced about this conversation. You invited me here under the pretense of a friendly interview, then spent the entire time questioning my motives, minimizing my experiences, and defending the very systems that caused harm to my family. You want balance? Here's balance. I'm done being polite about institutions that prioritize their reputation over human well-being. Seth's face is flushed, sweat visible on his forehead. Harry, I understand you're passionate about these issues, but I think you're mischaracterizing my questions. I'm mischaracterizing. Harry's voice is incredulous. Seth, you literally just suggested that my wife's mental health crisis and the racism she faced might be me projecting trauma from my mother's death. You turned my family's suffering into a punchline. You questioned whether we had the right to protect ourselves. How exactly am I mischaracterizing anything? The host tries one more time, his voice becoming almost pleading. Look, can we just take a breath here? I think we've gotten off track. No, Seth. Harry's voice is firm and final. We're exactly on track. This is what happens when you mistake politeness for weakness, when you confuse institutional loyalty with moral courage. You wanted to dig deeper? Well, here's the depth. Some of us refuse to be complicit in systems that cause harm, even when speaking out costs us everything. Seth looks around desperately, as if hoping for rescue from his producers or the audience. But there's nowhere to hide from the truth that's been unleashed in his studio. Harry, I really think we should move on to talking about your upcoming projects, ... My upcoming projects. Harry's voice is sharp with disbelief. Seth, after everything that just happened, you want to pivot to promotional material? This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly the kind of institutional thinking that prioritizes comfort over accountability. The audience watches in stunned silence as the interview completely derails. What started as a standard late-night appearance has become something unprecedented, a real-time deconstruction of power, privilege, and the cost of speaking truth to institutions that prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable realities. The studio feels like a pressure cooker about to explode. Seth's desperate attempt to redirect the conversation only fuels Harry's anger further. The prince's eyes flash with a combination of rage and disappointment that cuts through the television screen. "You know what, Seth?" Harry's voice carries a new tone, one of complete disgust. This entire conversation has been a masterclass in exactly what's wrong with media culture. You invite people on to discuss their most painful experiences, then judge them for how they've chosen to survive those experiences. Seth's hands tremble slightly as he shuffles his note cards, clearly out of his depth. "Harry, I really don't think that's what's happening here, ... Then what is happening here, Seth?" Harry challenges, his voice cutting through the host's weak protests. "Because from where I'm standing, you've spent the last 20 minutes questioning whether my wife's suicidal thoughts were valid, whether the racism she faced was real enough, whether we had the right to protect our children." The host's face is now completely red, sweat beading on his forehead. "I'm trying to ask the questions that people have." "No, Seth." Harry's voice booms through the studio, causing several audience members to jump. "You're not asking questions. People have. You're perpetuating the same harmful narratives that we've been fighting against. You're being a mouthpiece for the very systems that caused the harm in the first place." Seth tries to regain some semblance of control, his voice becoming slightly defensive. "Harry, I think you're being unfair to me personally. I'm just doing my job. Your job." Harry's laugh is harsh and bitter. "Seth, if your job requires you to minimize trauma, question victims, and defend harmful institutions, then maybe you need to find a new job." The audience gasps audibly at this direct attack. Seth's face goes from red to pale in seconds. That's completely uncalled for. "Harry, I've been nothing but respectful, ... respectful." Harry's voice rises to a near shout. "You think it's respectful to suggest that my wife's mental health crisis was me projecting? You think it's respectful to turn our family's trauma into a setup for your jokes? You think it's respectful to question whether we had the right to protect our children from the same system that failed to protect my mother?" Seth makes one final attempt to salvage his dignity. "Harry, I understand you're upset, but I think you're overreacting." The word overreacting is the final straw. Harry's face goes completely still, and when he speaks, his voice is deadly. "Quiet? Overreacting, Seth. My wife was denied mental health support when she was contemplating suicide. My son had his mixed-race heritage discussed as a potential problem before he was even born. My family was systematically destroyed in the media while the institution we served stood by and watched. And you think I'm overreacting?" Harry stands up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that echoes through the stunned studio. "You know what, Seth? This conversation is over. I'm not going to continue to be gaslit on national television by someone who clearly has no understanding of what real courage looks like." Seth's voice becomes almost panicked. "Harry, please, let's just take a breath and continue the conversation." "Continue the conversation." Harry's voice is incredulous as he takes a step away from his chair. "Seth, there is no conversation here. There's just you defending institutions that cause harm and me trying to explain why that's wrong. There's you minimizing trauma and me trying to educate you about the real cost of your comfort." The host makes a desperate attempt to prevent the interview from completely imploding. "Harry, our audience came here to hear from you, to understand your perspective, ... my perspective." Harry turns back toward Seth, his eyes blazing. "My perspective is that people like you are part of the problem. You invite people to share their truth, then spend the entire time questioning whether that truth is convenient enough for your audience. You want understanding without accountability, sympathy without change." Seth's voice becomes almost pleading. "That's not fair, Harry. I'm trying to present multiple viewpoints, ... multiple viewpoints." Harry's voice drips with contempt. "Seth, when someone tells you they've experienced racism, you don't present the viewpoint that maybe they're lying. When someone tells you their spouse was suicidal, you don't present the viewpoint that maybe they're exaggerating. When someone tells you they had to choose between their family's safety and institutional loyalty, you don't present the viewpoint that maybe they're being dramatic. The studio is now completely silent, except for Harry's voice, which carries the weight of years of frustration and betrayal. You want to know what multiple viewpoints look like? Here's one. Some of us refuse to be complicit in systems that cause harm, even when speaking out costs us everything. Here's another. Some of us believe that human well-being is more important than institutional reputation. And here's a third. Some of us think that courage means protecting the people you love, even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. Seth makes one last desperate attempt. Harry, I really think if we could just ... No, Seth. Harry's voice is final and absolute. We're done here. I came on this show thinking I was going to have a conversation with someone who understood the difference between accountability and attack, between truth-telling and institution bashing. Instead, I've spent the last half hour being lectured by someone who thinks my family's trauma is fair game for political debate. Harry takes another step toward the edge of the set. You know what the real tragedy is, Seth? People like you think you're being balanced when you're actually being complicit. You think you're being fair when you're actually being harmful. You think you're asking tough questions when you're actually perpetuating the same systems that caused the problems in the first place. Seth's voice is barely audible now. Harry, please don't leave like this. ... Harry pauses at the edge of the set and turns back one final time. Seth, I'm not leaving like anything. I'm leaving because I refuse to participate in a conversation that treats my family's suffering as entertainment, that questions our right to protect ourselves, and that prioritizes institutional comfort over human dignity. His final words cut through the studio like a blade. You wanted to dig deeper, Seth. Well, here's as deep as it gets. Some of us have lines we won't cross, principles we won't compromise, and people we won't sacrifice for the sake of other people's comfort. And if that makes us difficult guests, then so be it. With that, Harry turns and walks off the set, leaving Seth speechless and the audience in stunned silence. The camera captures the host's shocked face as he stares at the empty chair, where his guest had been moments before. The studio remains dead quiet for several long seconds before Seth finally manages to stammer, "We'll be right back after this commercial break." But everyone knows there's no coming back from what just happened. The interview that was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance has become something else entirely. A raw and unfiltered look at what happens when someone refuses to play by the rules of polite society, when truth-telling meets institutional protection. When personal integrity collides with public expectation, the camera fades to black on Seth's stunned face, leaving viewers with the echo of Harry's final words and the understanding that they've just witnessed something unprecedented in the usually safe space of late-night television. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Did Harry go too far, or was Seth out of line from the start? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking celebrity moments that you won't see anywhere else.